Okay, everyone, welcome to the sixth conversation called Be the Change. I'm Christy Money, and we have some lovely people here that I want to get to know better. So let's start with Sarah Hancock Jones. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. My name is Sarah Hancock Jones. I live in Bountiful, Utah. I've lived here for about a year, and I am the mom of 6 kids. I have 5 daughters, ages 12 to 4, and then a baby boy who's 2.
Oh, great. And what interested you in ordained women? What got you involved?
I was like, ordain women? Let's do that. That's a great idea. It seems like a good thing to increase the power of God on the earth. So
Mhm.
it seems like a no-brainer to me.
I concur. All right. Thanks, Sarah. Next, we have Kate Kelly, who is about to catch a flight in a couple hours. So, Kate, take it away.
Hey everybody, I'm really excited. I am leaving this evening actually. I'm leaving Utah en route to my new home, which is going to be Kenya. I'm going to be living in Nairobi. Luckily, they still have the internet in Nairobi, so I'm still going to be able to participate pretty actively in Ordained Women and on things like this. So I'm really excited. I'm feeling really good. And I'm also really excited that we're moving forward. I know that when we renamed, as you know from the website, we renamed them from discussions to conversations for many reasons, but one is we want to keep the conversation open, and anything so silly as a name shouldn't, deter that conversation at all. And the second reason is that we're adding additional conversations, so it's not just going to be 6. We're adding, the next one we're going to be adding is written by men for men, and it's going to be about how to be an effective ally to women in the church. So it's really exciting material, and I'm just really excited that we're moving on.
Me too. Moving forward. All right, thanks. So, Nancy, can you introduce yourself for a sec?
Sure. My name is Nancy Ross, and I'm chair of the social media committee for Ordained Women, and that's kind of what we do. I post profiles and watch the web page and do a bunch of different jobs here at Ordained Women.
Thanks, Nancy. And last but certainly not least, we have Danielle Mooney. Danielle, can you take it away?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Danielle. I live in Boston. I am currently staying home with my brand new baby. She's 2.5
That's adorable.
So that's the main new exciting thing in my life. And I have been involved with Ordained Women since the site launched. I had one of the first profiles up in the first group because I've long thought that that women have a much greater role to play in the church, and I think ordination is a really important way for us to get there. So I'm excited to have this discussion with you all.
Me too. All right. Thanks, Danielle. Okay, let's launch right in. So let's turn to the first page. I'm going to read the first quote by Mother Teresa because I love it so much, and that'll start us off. She said, "I used to pray that God would feed the hungry or do this or that, but now I pray that He will guide me to do whatever I'm supposed to do, what I can do. I used to pray for answers, but now I'm praying for strength. I used to believe that prayer changes things, but now I know that prayer changes us, and we change things."
That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought so, and I think it really relates to being the change in my life personally, for sure. That I've noticed in the last couple of years, my prayers have changed to ask what I can do instead of that things will happen. So,
Right.
anyone else?
Well, I think,
Go ahead, Nancy.
no, I was just going to say I agree with you, Christy. I think that
Mhm.
I think in the more recent years, my prayers have changed to more like, please God fix these problems, to please show me what I need to do. And I think that that has been a real turning point in my life, where I don't expect that people I don't know or who are distant and far away from me, that strangers will fix the world's problems, but that potentially I can be a part of that. And I think that that has been big for me in terms of changing my thinking about things.
I was going to chime in with my favorite quote, which is from Susan B. Anthony, who, as most Americans know, was instrumental in the ratification of the 19th Amendment, where women got the vote. And she was also a Quaker woman, and she did a lot of amazing things, but was a very strong woman of faith. And she said, someone asked her if she prayed, and she said, I pray every single second of my life, not on my knees, but with my work. And my work is to bring women into equality with men. Mm-hmm. And so I just, like, ever since I heard that quote, it really resonated with me. One, because Susan B. Anthony is my, historical crush, along with Alice Paul. But two, because that's really what I think about prayer, is that it's a form of work, and I see the work that we're doing as a prayer to our Heavenly Parents.
I love that. I love that. Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. So, on the second page, let me just emphasize that that President Uchtdorf had also said, if you want to move the world, you first have to move yourself. And similar, Gandhi had said, if we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. And we added that this is your discussion to anyone who's reading, to emphasize that this is very open-ended. We can't presume to know what the best way to be that change we want to see. So we are opening it up to let people decide what they think personally, what's best for their lives, what they can do in their particular community, this time in their lives. So that was something we wanted to emphasize. Let's see. Let's go to the activity on page 3. What did y'all think of that quote from Joseph Smith about including more women in ordinances or in practices that were usually done by men at the time? Any thoughts?
Yeah. I was just going to say, it's so interesting to read quotes like this, because you think it must have been so prevalent, you know what I mean? For the fact that Joseph Smith is piping up about it, and some people are saying, maybe we shouldn't, and some people are chiming in and saying, we have every right to do this, and he came down on the side of the women, you know what I mean? And so one of the things that really strikes me is how prevalent it must have been for him. It's not just one person doing it, you know what I mean? It was very, very prevalent. And women, when I think of the Restoration, I think all this, it was a really turbulent and creative and powerful time. And in the chaos, like, women really also participated in a lot of that restoration. You know what I mean? I think we've lost a lot of that. But I just think of these women, like, they're catching the Spirit the same way that the men are. They're, speaking in tongues and doing blessings and healing people. And, you think about the Restoration as a very unique time, but you don't see this aspect of it very often, where women were also part of that.
Well, and I think that would have been one of the really appealing things about early Mormonism to women, which is that women had the ability to exercise a lot of power and authority that they don't exercise in Mormonism now. But I think that would have been really appealing. Usually, in the sociology of religion, usually new religions have a lot more space for women, and as those religions become more like other religions, then that withdraws, and Mormonism follows that same pattern. But I imagine that exercising all those spiritual gifts would have been a huge draw, especially for the many charismatic women in early Mormonism.
You know, this quote in particular is regarding the laying on of hands. I think there were other things that women were doing. But that is such a natural jump because women are mothers, some of us are mothers, so we're already tending to the sick. So the idea that, like he says, there could be no more sin in any female laying hands on the sick than in wetting the face with water. This is love, this is concern, this is caring, this is what we as people do. So why would you exclude women from something like that? It almost seems unnatural to say we're going to separate this by virtue of gender. Right.
Yeah. And I would just chime in that some women are mothers.
That's true.
I always have to put a plug in that not all women are mothers, myself included. This was a big discrepancy between my state president and I when we met in May, that all women are mothers. So I think it's just so important to understand that, like, just like what Sarah said, that this is something that people do, and women are people. So people shouldn't be excluded, especially not 50% of people.
Right.
Yes.
What I really love about this quote is that Joseph talks about how God justifies the work of these women, sanctions it by enacting the blessings that they are asking for when they lay their hands on the sick or the afflicted. And I think that is one of the most powerful parts of the quote to me, because we know from the lessons that we get at church about priesthood that priesthood is God's power and authority on church. And authority comes, from the institution and the community, but the power of the priesthood has to come through faith and through God. God is the power behind the priesthood. And so, and the power behind any act of faith. And so when women and men act with faith to do what they think is God's will, then if it is God's will, then you see God sanction it and justify the action. And so, if you see women capable of performing acts of great faith and service, then there is no doubt that God's hand is in it.
Right.
So that's what I really like about the quote is Joseph's point. It points out that obviously that they don't need to be having a debate about whether women can do this, because God's already said women can do it by the fact that when women lay their hands on the sick are healed. And so it's a silly debate to be having, basically, because God's already said that he approves, because the healing wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that, Danielle. Thank you. So speaking of debates, let's go down to the group discussion questions, because we see this list of things that women could do even without ordination that could increase their roles and visibility. And the second question is this appropriate? Is it appropriate to raise such issues in church? I want to throw that out there. I mean, because we are dealing with that question on a local level right now. So, what do you think?
Well, I think I don't know. I struggle with this because, as Ali Isom, who's the church official representative, said on NPR, that these discussions can take place in Relief Society and in sacrament meeting and within our congregations. That hasn't been my experience per se, but it seems like that the church is really struggling with, it's okay to ask questions, but you have to ask them in a certain way. The positive side of that is the first part, which is it's okay to ask questions. And so I think we really need to take them at their word, and we need to start bringing this up. a lot of these things, the list included in the packet aren't things that can be raised at the individual local level, but some of them can, and so I think we should raise it. Another thing, I think one of the things that jumped out to me was for women to be the heads of the church-owned universities, and that's actually not. That would bring the BYU and other schools up to current, academic standards, which is that women academics are treated the same way as male academics, and I think it would help the university's credibility, that they didn't discriminate against women categorically. And I think there's a lot of other changes like that don't necessarily even, I think that should be brought up in academia. You know what I mean? Like, what kind of legitimate university institution doesn't let any women serve in administrative roles? Like, that's ridiculous in the 21st century. And I think the same thing for, I'm an attorney, and there's a attorneys sort of, it's essentially a professional association. It's called the J. Reuben Clark Society, and there are regional leaders within that society and for the church, but because it's a calling, only male attorneys can serve in those positions. And so even though it's a professional association of attorneys, and the only requirement should be, professional capability and that you're barred, it's only available to men. So I think there are a lot of areas where not only in church, but in these professional associations, in academia, in other areas, we should be raising these questions about the legitimacy of discriminatory policies.
Well, and I think that's a really good example, Kate, of like a bigger institutional change that could be made. I think there are lots of changes too that can be made on a local level without needing to have big institutional approval. Sometimes I notice that we don't have nearly as many women speak in sacrament meeting as we do men, and it's very rare for women to speak last, which is kind of a position of honor or a position of respect to let someone speak last. They generally get the most time. And it's very rare in my ward that happens. It did happen today, but only because the Relief Society presidency was speaking. And so I think that there are a lot of things like that where we simply just need to be able to give the jobs that can go to men or women and make sure that they're being divided up more fairly than they currently are, where I think often men, because they have the priesthood or because they served a mission, they're kind of the go-to people for particular kinds of jobs. And I just think it would be great if women could be approached for many more of those jobs. And including there are other things on this list that also don't require big change. They just require us to enact it and become aware. Something like using more gender-inclusive language. The church at large can use more gender-inclusive language, but we can also use more gender-inclusive language in our sacrament meetings and when we teach. Like, that's no change necessary. We just have to change it by doing it. And I think that that's really important, is that there are some things that, like, I can't affect, but there are some things I can affect. When I teach Relief Society, I can use more gender-inclusive language. And so I think that's important to point out, is that there are some things that we can just go ahead and do.
Well, one thing I found interesting about Ali Isom's statement, that we can have these types of conversations, especially in Relief Society, perfect venue for us to talk about our exclusion of our own church. But at the same time, that's probably not the best place to affect some change, because the people making decisions aren't in Relief Society.
Right.
They're in priesthood meetings. So we need to have those conversations in mixed gender settings, because right now, the decisions are being made by men.
Right. And I think there's also, again, the problem where if you do bring something up in like a Relief Society meeting, which should be pretty safe, there's probably a reasonably high risk of sanction one way or another. And
it
so
social capital every time you're going to say something.
Right. Or even you might be not called to something because of something you once said, or not asked to do various jobs based on a comment you once made. And we've certainly heard lots of anecdotal stories about this kind of extremely informal sanctioning where nobody tells you you're in trouble, but you once said something and someone complained. And so you're in a very informal kind of probationary situation that you can't really fix because it's not official. And not that we can really fix that either. But, it's difficult.
Yeah. I also wanted to chime in about the bringing it up in Relief Society thing, though. I feel like a lot of times we don't even know how other women feel. I know my stake president said when I met with him, I was literally the only woman in the stake who had any problems with gender inequality in the church, not just ordained women, just like gender inequality in the church. He said I was the only one. And I said, well, anecdotally, I've talked to other people in my ward, I've talked to other people in the stake, that's not true, but I didn't really know, like, because I hadn't brought it up in Relief Society, you know what I mean? And so I think sometimes we're like, well, you can't really change anything, why should we even talk about it in Relief Society? Part of that process I've come to realize is knowing what other women think and seeing who thinks what. You know, I don't even know in my ward who necessarily has problems with gender inequality in the church because we don't bring it up. And I think if we go to our leaders, for me, it was just me. Like, I'm the only one. I'm going by myself. I'm not saying, like, hey, we had a, you know, we talked about this in Relief Society and there were 25 of us who thought that this change could happen. I felt very isolated because I was saying, like, you know, I don't have concrete examples I can show to you that this isn't just me. And so I think part of the value is getting together as women and saying, like, nope, we talked this out amongst ourselves, we came to consensus, and we think women should speak last in sacrament meeting, or whatever it is. You know, you can't all agree on ordination necessarily, but there are other things, incremental things, where it would look much better if you talked about it as a Relief Society and the leader in charge of that stewardship, the Relief Society president, took it to the bishop in a formal way. You know what I mean? That's the way for things to get. I think that's where talking about it in Relief Society could bring some really concrete changes.
Right.
I love that model. That's a great idea.
Well, and I think that would be really bottom up. You know, and that would be, let's decide as a Relief Society the kind of changes we would like to see. So nobody's having anything forced on them that they're not okay with, but you have a discussion, and that just seems really organic. Sometimes it seems like currently the way that change happens in the church is not as organic as it could be with that simple, you know, we kind of talked about it as a Relief Society, we kind of came up with some ideas, dear Bishop, here are our ideas, which would I think be a wonderful way of addressing concerns in the church, because it starts by asking the people who are impacted what they think.
Well, and then taking that a step further is like, okay, we did this in our ward and it worked. And sharing that, you know, saying this happened in our stake, it changed, this is how it positively affected people, and now we have the internet, so we can know if something happens in Boston, if something happens in California, if something happens in Nairobi, Kenya, like, we'll know, and then we can start implementing it at different levels. Like, I think, yeah, I think that would be amazing, and I hadn't really thought about that before, and I kept myself really quiet because I thought it was disrespectful to talk about it in church.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think you do have to be careful of other people's feelings, but I think that generally speaking, you know, we all come to church to feel good and be edified, and so I think the natural inclination that we all have is to be respectful and to have these conversations in a way that's consensus building rather than divisive, and to say, you know, that these are my feelings, this is my experience, and I should be able to say that and share that with the people that I worship with, and by the same token, I need to be receptive to other people sharing what their experience is and what their opinions are. And I think the more that we practice those kinds of conversations by actually having them, the stronger our ward communities become, and the stronger our stakes become, and the stronger our churches.
And I think we also then can learn to disagree more respectfully. I think there's this idea that at church we all have to agree on every single point, where I think things are always more complicated. Recently I've been really surprised. A number of weeks ago, a local news article came out about me and how I felt about Kate's excommunication. And after that article came out, several women in my ward came up to me and expressed, you know, solidarity for what was happening. And I would have never known that they cared about some of these issues, and maybe they don't care about the ordination of women specifically, but that but that this whole issue really struck a chord with them, and that's really surprised me. And I think that we go to church and we're quiet because we don't want to rock the boat, and we know that sanctions or problems might occur if we speak our minds, but it turns out that there are other people who feel the way we do, or at least part of what we do, and I just wish that with a collective voice we could speak to those issues.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my bishop a few months ago devoted a Fifth Sunday lesson to just demonstrating. He asked my husband and I to help create a survey and sent it to all the adult members of the ward on different aspects of Mormon doctrine. But the survey had different answers for how one might feel about a question of doctrine, how one might believe, like, for example, how prayer works, or how, or what the role of the scriptures might play in your life, or prophetic statements by prophetic leaders. How do you know when it's prophecy from God and when it's not? And so there were just different options, and basically all of the options were possible for all of the questions for a faithful Mormon to have that particular feeling. And even though they were all really different, the given answers to questions, and just on even the things that seem really basic, it became clear that the members of our congregation had a varied, none of the questions had everyone answering them just one way, because not everyone feels that way, even about the simplest questions in the church, because we all experience God differently, even within our own religion. And explicitly, our bishop said, like, when we are able to know that we come from these different perspectives, we can better have these conversations, and when we disagree, we can know why. If we get to the basic issues, but are still respectful about the fact that you can think X and still be faithful, even if person over here thinks Y.
Mm-hmm. That's a great example of your bishop trying to demonstrate diversity of belief in a respectful way. That's a really great example.
Yeah, I think it was a really great lesson, and everyone had a really good time. It was fascinating to see what everyone thought, and so it was an enjoyable discussion. It was interesting, and no one, I think, walked away feeling badly for how they felt about something, or felt like made fun of for having, a more metaphorical view, or made fun of for having a more literal view, or anything like that. It was just we were all able to enjoy learning what other people thought about it, and I think that's why it's appropriate to have these conversations at church. Like, these conversations can be enjoyable, to learn where other people are. It makes your relationships with other people stronger.
I also think that if we're able to share a wider variety of beliefs and experiences at church, that's got to be helpful in supporting other people with whatever they're going through with regard to their spirituality. I mean, this is kind of what we've experienced in kind of organized online Mormon feminism, is that when we can get together and be free to talk about our problems, a lot of people will chime in with solutions or how they think about something, and eventually there's going to be an answer that maybe resonates with you and helps you work out whatever that issue is. And so by not sharing our perspectives and by not sharing our experiences, we are not helping each other grow in our wards. Because if there's always this, like, I've got to totally filter what I say and I can't really be my authentic self, and we're all just going to say what's in the manual anyway, then we're probably not really going to learn and grow very much. But if we can get to that place where we can express a greater diversity of belief, like that's going to be legitimately helpful to other people, I'm sure, in our wards, where it won't be if we can never get there.
Yeah. Oh, Nancy, I completely agree. So thank you, everyone, for talking about your local experiences. We're going to talk more about them in just a second, because I'm going to segue into the contributions part of this conversation, where, you know, luckily we have all these wonderful women who contributed actually inside the packet itself, and so I want to highlight each of your experiences. And so just to start off, for me personally, being the change has everything to do with studying the scriptures for me, and likening them to my own daily life. So in here I've got 2 Timothy 1:7, D&C 10:5, Matthew 7:7 and 8, and Matthew 10:29 through 31. All of these have been integral to my development and desire to participate in these actions. And I can't say enough about how I love the scriptures, and I'm glad that they're here for me to learn and grow from. So let me ask Danielle. You do this professionally, so I would love to hear about what you feel are appropriate boundaries to set in these conversations to have how they can be as productive as possible. I'm really glad that you're here.
Oh,
So I know you spoke about it a bit earlier, but please let us know what you think.
yeah. Well, so I don't exactly do this professionally, but I have had experience doing it with different groups, and so when you have these difficult conversations, I think all 10 of these tips are really helpful. But the one like overall sentiment that I think is really important is to keep in mind that when you're bringing things up that you are trying to build consensus, you're not trying to have a debate. That the language you use, the tone you use, and the attitude that you enter the conversation with will be more effective when it comes from a place of trying to find common ground with the person that you're talking to, rather than convince them that you are right and they are wrong. Because we're all just naturally very defensive of the conclusions that we've come to, the opinions that we hold right now. And when we do change our minds, for all of us, it tends to take time, and it tends to take multiple conversations, and we need time to sit with the information. So when I've had, you know, for example, in college, I'm sure a lot of people have the experience of meeting people from totally different, you know, walks of life, and you hear someone describe their experience that somehow challenges what you thought before, and I found that I generally had to walk away and sit with that for a while before I was able to incorporate it with what, the narrative that I had before, to understand about a given issue. And so, for example, if we're talking to our leaders about gender inequality in the church, you may have a bishop who has never thought about it before, and has never occurred to him that a woman might feel unequal, or see at all that there is inequality. And so offering a few examples but letting him have the time and space to think about it, rather than pushing for, an admission that you're right in the moment, tends to be, the most helpful, because people need time to adjust to new lenses when they learn new information. And then the other, I think, really critical thing is to just keep in mind that for both people, these conversations, while we talked about before, ideally are enjoyable, and ideally are about finding common ground, that if it feels stressful, that we can set boundaries for ourselves in the conversation, that you can outline the parameters of what you want to talk about in the conversation before it starts. You can decide to end the conversation if you feel like you or the other person are getting to a place where it's no longer going to be productive and it's going to be contentious or hurtful to either one of you. And that way, those the relationship that you have with that person isn't harmed by the conversation. The goal is to strengthen the relationship, and setting boundaries, including, ending a conversation or only agreeing to the conversation in certain circumstances where you feel safe and comfortable, and the same for them, allows those conversations to happen with the best potential good at the end of them. I think sometimes at church we feel pressured to have conversations on timelines that are not our own. For example, if you have a leader grab you out of a lesson, and maybe you had a hard morning getting out the door, and you weren't expecting to have the conversation, and you're not in a great mood, and you feel a little thrown off. The kind of like authority feeling of being called to someone's office can make you feel like you have to have the conversation at that time. But we are always in charge of our own behavior, and we have to take responsibility for that and say, this maybe isn't a good time for me. We need to meet later, and draw those kinds of boundaries in order to ultimately have the discussion go better than it would if you're unprepared and not feeling good about, your day and your stress. So that's what I have found to be kind of the most helpful things about trying to have what can be really sensitive conversations, particularly at church.
And I just wanted to chime in. I think for me, one of the most difficult things about having a conversation where you're going to disagree, especially at church, for me as a Mormon woman, is sticking up for myself. Mm-hmm. And not just saying, oh, maybe you're right, and blah, blah, blah. Like my core tendency, and I know a lot of people wouldn't think this about me, but my core tendency is just to appease and, start a sentence out with I'm sorry, and, apologize for myself in advance. And so I think one thing that I found really helpful, this is just a dumb, way of doing it, or something like a trick that helps me, but I say, I stand up for myself and I say, I totally disagree with you, but I try to say it in the nicest voice possible. So that helps me control my tone and helps them feel like I'm not attacking them. They're like, oh, she's saying it nicely, so I don't really know how to read this, but I'm really, really firm on what I think and what I believe, but I'm not firm on the tone. So this is maybe where Ali Isom and I agree. tone is important. And maybe it's just because of my conditioning as a Mormon woman. I don't know, but it helps me to be like, okay, I'm going to stand up for myself. I'm going to say I totally disagree with you, but I'm going to be like, you know what? I totally disagree. In fact, I couldn't disagree more. And then I'm like, well, I said what I meant, and I didn't attack them. So I accomplished like my Mormon side of being nice, and I accomplished my feminist side of sticking up for myself and my argument.
And I think that's where it's so important, like Nancy was talking about. We don't know who else is sitting there going, I don't really agree with what was just said, and it was kind of cast off like doctrine, but it's not really. That was the teacher's opinion. And so by us standing up and saying, I disagree with that, then it kind of allows room for other people to disagree with that too. And for now, that not to be the only way that we experience Mormonism, and not the only way that we experience our church and our doctrine. Because like Danielle was talking about, it is individual, and we all experience God differently, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. All right, Sarah, would you be willing to talk about your experience where you had one of those productive conversations with your bishop? It's in the packet, but I'd love to hear about your impressions after the fact, what you think about how that went.
So anyone can read the experience in the conversation, and that it was a really good experience for both my husband and I think the bishop would say the same thing, that we really enjoyed sharing and listening to each other. Sorry, I can't mute it because now I'm talking, my phone's ringing.
It's okay.
But just ever since then, it's been good, and I've had more courage to stand up because I kind of feel like my bishop has my back, and I can, if anyone from my ward goes to my bishop and say, have you heard these crazy things that Sarah Jones is saying? He'll say, yeah, she came and said them to me too, so it's all good. So I think that freed me up to have a little bit more courage when it comes to talking with people in my ward. I don't attend Relief Society or Sunday school. I work in the primary. So I have my own sphere of influence, and I've been talking to the kids when I bear my testimony, always remembering our Heavenly Mother and talking about that. And so I liked what Nancy said. There's always something we can do. Even if there are big changes that need to happen, and there are ward changes, but there are individual changes too. And there are the ways we talk to each other and the ways we fulfill our individual callings. And so I think that by talking with my bishop, it just has helped me have more courage to take those next steps in my life to make the next incremental changes to get us all where we can be.
Oh, thanks, Sarah. I really appreciate you sharing that.
Oh, we lost Christy.
Oh no.
Okay. Well, we'll sally forth without our fearless leader. Hopefully Christy can jump back on, but I really appreciate that, Sarah, particularly because I think there's a lot going on in the news and elsewhere about negative experiences with leaders. And negative experiences are very real, and those painful experiences should be acknowledged. But I think it's really important to hear those positive experiences, because it is, there's a positive side of leadership roulette, and the positive side is maybe your bishop is really nice. Maybe he'll listen to you. Maybe he'll do a survey about what people think about different things. There's all kinds of experiences, and so I think those stories aren't as headline catching necessarily, but you have to give your leaders the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they will be on your side. Maybe they'll agree. Maybe they'll be willing to engage. And so I think it's really, really, really healthy and productive, both to create boundaries like Danielle talked about, but also to at least at the very beginning give them the benefit of the doubt that they're going to take you seriously. So that's really cool. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, the other thing that I just thought of while you were talking, Kate, about giving, our leaders the benefit of the doubt, I think that's really important, because I think that a lot of us will find that our leaders really want us and the other members of their congregations to have a good experience at church, and they are doing really hard callings as an act of service. And they're interested in serving us and helping us have good experiences at church and grow closer to God, and that when we talk to them, we give them a chance to make change and to be more effective leaders and to help us. And we give them more scope for performing the service that they generously and eagerly have taken on in the first place. So I think that that's another aspect of why having these conversations is so important, because it gives our leaders from, our auxiliary presidencies to, our ward priesthood leaders the chance to do their callings more effectively. We see that with visiting teaching, right? The Relief Society president can't see to the needs of every family and sister in the ward if she doesn't know what those needs are. And so we have visiting teaching to help communicate when someone in the ward has a need. And so we can communicate for ourselves, too, when we have a need and would like to see something changed.
I think, too, we just need to remember that our Heavenly Parents, they are behind this movement for equality. So, I found it so interesting that I had been fasting and praying and hoping for this great outcome with my bishop, hoping to be able to keep my temple recommend and hoping to be able to work with my ward through a calling and having all those experiences, because I think those are valuable for me and my growth as a mortal here on this earth. So I had been hoping and praying and fasting for that. And I don't think it was chance that my bishop had an experience just the week before that opened his eyes to how blacks receive the priesthood in our church and how revelation comes and how doctrine changes. And so I think we can have confidence in our Heavenly Parents that things will work out for our good. And even if it doesn't feel like good initially, like you're talking about, Danielle, then we're giving them that space and that chance to hear us and then sit with that and think about it. So even if it feels hard, we are playing an important role in our church right now by being courageous and talking about these things.
And I just wanted to chime in with one thing, somewhat, the positive side of even the negative side of interactions with church leaders. I think, if you've given them the benefit of the doubt, at the end of the day, if something negative does happen and you are disciplined, you can rest assured that you gave them every chance to do the right thing. In my case, I'm like, well, it was a negative outcome, and, probably the worst possible outcome within Mormon discipline. But at the end of the day, I know I did the right thing. I gave them the chance to engage. I tried the best that I did and could have. And then I just, I can move forward knowing that I did that and I acted with integrity. And I think also I just want to put this out there that a lot of times interactions with leaders are very nerve-wracking for a lot of good reasons, because they have all the power. But I think we can mitigate those by taking some of our power back, by creating boundaries. When they ask for a meeting, we can say, what's the meeting about? Can we set an agenda? We can control a lot of that, and I think we should. But I also think, I just want people to know that the worst possible outcome is not that bad. I'm excommunicated, but I'm still a happy person. I feel very confident. I feel the Spirit. I'm moving forward. So, you're hoping for the best possible outcome, which is what Sarah had. But even if you have the worst possible outcome, as long as you've acted with integrity, it's not over. Nothing's over, and life, goes on.
I love that. I completely agree. You have to live with integrity, because if you don't, I don't know how you can live with yourself. So you're a huge, awesome example for all of us, Kate. I'm so grateful for everything you're doing.
Yeah. It's like I've explained it before. I feel like a lot of times in human evolution, we feel like the worst thing that could happen to us is like a saber-toothed tiger is going to eat us. Like, you actually feel like you're going to die if the worst thing is going to happen, but you're not. Like, the worst thing that can happen happened to me, and it's not that bad. I mean, there are very severe consequences, but I feel like I acted with integrity, and I went to Disneyland the next week. Like, happiness exists everywhere.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of my favorite quotations, which is from a writer named Audre Lorde, which is that your silence will not protect you. And I think about that all the time when I think about why I have participated in Ordained Women and why I feel compelled to be honest about the inequality that I see in the church. And it's because being silent won't mean the church gets any more equal. Being silent doesn't mean that I will stop feeling the effects of a patriarchy, and it doesn't mean that the hurts of being that you face as a woman when you feel overlooked because of your gender, when you feel forgotten because of your gender, when you feel slighted because of your gender, and abused because of your gender, those hurts don't go away because of being silent. They still continue. And so in the face of the options to either be silent and keep hurting or speak honestly and keep hurting, you know, because hurt is inevitable in life. I found that if I will speak, then there's at least the chance and some room for things to get better. And they just simply cannot if we quietly accept the status quo.
I think all my life I had quietly absorbed, not only I'd been silent about the issues that I saw in the church. I remember being a teenager and being particularly bothered by the way in which the young men did all these great activities, and we kind of had very little young women. And it's not that I didn't have good leaders or there weren't some good opportunities, but the boys clearly had a whole lot more, and I just decided, okay, well, I guess I'm not supposed to point these things out, I'm not supposed to notice, and so I was silent for a very long time. And keeping me silent was this fear that grew over time of, you know, I'm not allowed, not only shouldn't I say anything, but if I do say something, then there's going to be a really negative consequence. And I just, this whole fear about speaking my truth had become such an overpowering thing and had been something that I had lived with for so long that I didn't even realize it was there. Like, it had become such a part of me. And I don't think that God wants us to live with that kind of fear. One thing I experienced, and I wrote a poem about this, and it's in the packet. It's a poem called I Left My Fear on Temple Square. When I participated in the April action, when I went and I stood in line for the priesthood session, it was such a terrifying thing for me. I was really scared. I was really nervous. I remember the drive up from St. George to Salt Lake. You know, was like filled with this like nervous energy. But when I was there and I did it, it was hard and emotional, and it took me like a while to process. But in the process of like facing my fears and simply asking for something that I wanted, even though it challenged a cultural and a religious norm, it really allowed me to leave so much of my fear behind. And leaving my fear behind has really been such an extremely freeing experience for me. I no longer feel bound by the same kinds of fears that really had bound me before. And even though I'm not completely free of fear, I've come such a long way in letting go of my fear that I feel like I can speak my truth and it is not going to hurt me. Like, it may not always have the most wonderful consequences, but I can speak my truth and I can be myself. And I can be that person without fear. And when I live without fear, I feel filled with purpose, and I feel filled with, it's like there are just fewer things constraining me, and I feel like that has been such a positive thing in my life, that letting go of fear. And I don't think that my parents or my church leaders realized that they were cultivating fear in me, but that's kind of what happened. And so letting go of the fear, facing our fears, like Batman in the cave with the bats, really trying to approach our fears and to, breathe through those difficult situations that we think are going to be so awful and the world's going to end, like Kate had said. We realize that there's life after our difficult situations, regardless of what happens, and that life goes on, and that we go on, and maybe we go on better as a result of experiencing some of these difficult things. And so, my experience has just been really hopeful for me, that when I face my fears, my very deep-rooted fears that I've been nurturing for a really long time, that when I face them, when I confront them, when I try to shed them, that I grow as a person. And I've just felt tremendous strength since I've worked on shedding fear. And that's just been a really good thing for me.
Yeah, I love that, because God doesn't want us to be afraid either. Just like the scripture that Christy talked about, 2 Timothy 1:7, for God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind.
And I think, what better servants can we be in the hands of the Lord when we are not controlled by fear, but when we are bold and have power and can do what we're supposed to do?
Well, and I truly feel like we can count on our heavenly parents to set up the situations for us to do these types of things. So if we have these feelings, okay, there's gender inequality in a church. I would like women to be ordained. I want to have a venue to talk about that. Okay, so let's ask Heavenly Father, who can create a space for us. I was really surprised when I turned this over to Heavenly Father and I said, okay, I will talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
The opportunities are like daily, and I'm not kidding, either one-on-one with a friend or at a book club or wherever I'm at, I get to say things, and I'm not even bringing it up. People are bringing it up around me, and so I feel like that is a testimony that our heavenly parents are behind this, and when we say, we'll help you, they will offer those opportunities for us to speak up, and then we can feel how good that feels to be authentic, and it's just self-reinforcing. We just want to keep doing it because there's no more fear anymore. It's exciting. It's great.
And I just want to chime in too. Like, I think that's the project of Ordained Women. We as women can't control whether or not women will be ordained, and the success of the movement isn't actually really dependent on that. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, the success of the movement is us. The success of the movement is that we've learned to speak up for ourselves and that we're helping other people speak up for themselves. I know, when Nancy first started with Ordained Women, Nancy only wrote under her first name without her last name, and then got a little more brave and started using her surname, and now it's just like this amazing, badass Mormon feminist activist. And I guess we can bleep that out in the recording. But Nancy is awesome, you know what I mean? And like, to me, that's the project of Ordained Women. That's us speaking up for ourselves, no matter what the outcome is, because we can't always control the outcome. We can't control what the prophet does. We can't control what the brethren do. We can't control what our bishops do. But we can control our own stories, and we can assert those, and we can speak up, and we can, leave our fear behind us. And so that's the success of this movement. It's not, the media attention. It's not any of these other things. It's what we've become. And that's huge. I mean, that's really huge.
I completely agree.
Great measure of success.
Nancy's like, yep, I am a badass.
She completely agrees.
Awesome. Well, we should probably wrap up, but the final thing in the discussion is the recent First Presidency statement. And I think a lot of people are feeling a lot of doom and gloom, and like, this is the end of everything. But from the perspective of Ordained Women, I know that all of us feel like this is the very beginning of a conversation, It's been a very rough few months, and I want to acknowledge that because that is just not only true for me, but for lots of people. And we're still moving through that process, so we need to give ourselves time and patience and love. But for me, this is the very beginning of a conversation. I mean, I've described it as the tip of the iceberg. Like, I think public affairs of the church sees the tip of the iceberg, and they're getting out, like, huge blow dryers and trying to, like melt that iceberg. Like, go away, go away, go away. But they don't see the rest of the iceberg that's going to, submerge from the ocean, and that is coming. So this is just the beginning. And I think the first presidency statement, actually, in my opinion, even when that immediately came out, I remember Peggy Fletcher Stack called me to get my reaction to it, and I was very positive. I'm a generally positive person, but I was very positive because I said, it doesn't say that women will never be ordained. It actually doesn't even say anything about women. It just says, it restates the current policy, which we all agree men are currently ordained to serve in priesthood offices. But it didn't say anything about, it left the future wide open. So I see that as a very positive thing. So I don't know if you guys want to chime in. This is great. If you could ask the first presidency anything, what would you ask them? Also, how can we all contribute equally to the creation of Zion? So I don't know if each person wants to maybe give their 30-second, answer either one of those questions, and I think we'll wrap it up.
I'll go ahead and start by saying, just answering the Zion question, how do we each build up Zion? I think we pray for guidance from our heavenly parents as to what they want us to do, and then we go and do that thing, and that's how I got here today, as I'm sure many other people did as well.
Yeah. I think that if I could ask the first presidency any question, I would ask, what can we do today, right now, to give women a more expanded role in the church? Like, we have multiple lists and ideas that have been put forward by Mormon feminists, and what, of these proposals can we do right now? Like, what things can we change, and that, because so many of them don't require doctrinal shifts or revelation or anything. It's just a matter of policy and sometimes even tradition and unexamined kind of habits that we have. And so I would say, like, what can we do today, right now? Because I think that they have a lot of love for all the members of the church, including sisters, and I think that the structure of the church being so large can make it feel like change is hard to come by, but I think that there are things that we could do today, and I would love to know what those things are, and then I would want to know how I could help. And then I'd ask, what can we do so that women can be ordained? On a longer term. So let's talk what we need to do today, and then let's create a long term.
Like, while I'm sitting here, might as well also just bring this up.
I mean, while we're in this elevator, and I have your attention.
Just thought I'd put a plug in.
Well, my timeline's a little different. I've got a 7-year-old who's asking, she'll be 8 in September. Mom, will you have the priesthood by the time I get baptized? Because I kind of want to choose between you and Dad. So I feel like, and she was the one today, too, watching the sacrament. She's like, I could tell she's thinking, the wheels are turning, like, I wonder if I'll be getting to do that. Because she knows all about the ordained women movement. She's on board. But I think my next step is to ask. We can write letters to the first presidency, and I was inspired by one of the conversations about young people of African descent writing to the first presidency and saying, I would like these blessings. Can you please extend these blessings to me? And so that's our next step as a family. I have 5 daughters, and we're going to be on our little letter writing campaign. And our question is, will you please ordain us? We would like to be ordained to the priesthood of God. Is that possible? Will you please ask? So that's our next step as a family.
I love that. And that's also about teaching them to assert their voice.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, as a young girl, I never, you know, my parents were pretty open and feminist and progressive, but I never did that. And I think that is a really great example of how to teach the next generation, because they're going to be doing some pretty awesome stuff. And I'm really excited about what they do. Okay, well, I think that wraps it up, unless anyone else had anything they wanted to chime in. I wanted to put in a plug for the entire discussion series. If you're just tuning in for discussion 6, all of the previous conversations, the previous conversations, newly named conversations, are all available on the website ordainedwomen.org. You can go through them. Each of them has a recorded Google Hangout. But the original intention for the conversations was for people to meet in person. So if you have the opportunity, if you live by other Mormon feminists, if you can get together with your friends on Skype, and if you can kind of create these conversations with people you know, that's the intention. So please continue to do that. And also keep posted for the new Male Allies discussion that's coming out, written by and for men.
That is so exciting.
Yeah, very exciting. It's going to be really good. And there's also going to be a Google Hangout accompanying the Male Allies discussion. So, yeah, stay tuned.
Okay, bye-bye.
Ordained Women moves forward. Hooray!